I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is Psychacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is, what is heaven? So I was thinking about this subject the other day, and immediately what came into my mind when I considered the concepts of heaven and hell was that heaven was a place of eternal pleasure and comfort, like being fed grapes by gorgeous angels while I recline on some divine divan, and that hell was a place of unrelenting pain and suffering, like being stabbed with pitchforks by hideous demons while I'm pursued through fire and brimstone. And I think this is a very superficial conceptualization, but I also think it's the most prevalent view of those concepts in society. And you can see how obviously they are connected to hedonic principles, that hell is pain and heaven is pleasure. Then I looked at that a little more carefully, because it only takes a modicum of additional intellectual effort to understand that abiding in a place of unremitting pleasure would almost certainly become hellish in its own right, if for no other reason that it would likely become insufferably tedious and boring. So then I thought that maybe, for me personally, heaven doesn't look like just luxuriating in pleasure and comfort. So what might heaven look like for me? And I thought, heaven for me might actually look like a video game, an action-adventure game like The Legend of Zelda, or a role-playing game like Final Fantasy. In the game, I have to overcome great challenges by overcoming smaller challenges, collecting key items, and leveling up important stats along the way. And all of these challenges are linked in an overarching quest to save the world or to defeat a great evil or something like that. And so I thought heaven for me might be the opportunity to become victorious in a difficult and complex quest throughout the world. And then I thought about that further, and I realized that the only way this quest would be personally compelling would be if I were not all-powerful, or all-knowing, or all-good. A lot of video games, for instance, have a New Game Plus feature, which allows you to start a new game with the save data of a finished game. This allows your character to begin the adventure with most or all of his in-game stats and items in tow, which obviously makes the game significantly easier. Playing with such an overpowered character, however, can make the game rather boring, because on some level, the threat that you will be unsuccessful is almost completely eradicated, and your victory becomes a foregone conclusion. Now, heaven must be a game that we can win, which means that hell must be a game that we can't. These games, after all, have a predetermined narrative that destines the protagonist to victory so long as he continues to overcome the difficulties placed in his path. But by the same token, for the game to be emotionally compelling, it has to at least seem as though we could possibly lose. So what I realized is that heaven, for me, must be an opportunity to overcome difficulties in a narrative that predetermines my victory, but that denies me knowledge of that predetermination, as this would create at least the illusion of stakes in order to facilitate emotional participation. And then I realized that this definition of heaven is actually very similar to life. The only possible difference between the two is really this idea of whether or not our victory is predetermined. In a game, we know that the narrative progresses along a predetermined trajectory toward victory. In life, it doesn't seem to be the case. So there are two possibilities. Either it doesn't seem to be the case because it isn't the case, or that it doesn't seem to be the case because we are denied knowledge of that predetermination, which, of course, is my working definition of heaven. This means that the way to transform life into heaven is through the actualization of faith, because it would only be through faith that we could approach the conviction of a guaranteed victory that we were denied knowledge of, so that we could pass through the emotional experience of being alive. And this is actually a pretty compelling idea, that the life we are living right now can potentially be transformed into a heavenly experience through the power of faith. That we can't not win, but we kind of have to be made to believe that we can lose for our own good. So I wanted to share that thought with you. Hopefully it makes sense. And if you've ever heard of a theologian or a philosopher that talks about this, please get in touch with me. I'd very much like to know if anyone else has thought along these same lines. And thanks for listening. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, please like, rate, and review this episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please drop a comment below. Finally, if you'd like to schedule a consultation, you can reach me at psychackspodcast@gmail.com. Talk to you soon.